Hey, Demi. Today's the end of the book. It's chapter 17. It's our last chapter of Sarny. Anything you want to say to the kids? Anything you want to say about Sarny? Oh, that's very nice, Jimmy. Thanks for that. Oh, that's very nice. Okay, I'm gonna go read Sarny to the children, okay? Bye, Demi. Hey, kids. So, today I'm recording our final chapter, chapter 17 in Sarny from my second guest bedroom. It's such a beautiful day out, but it is a bit chilly, so I thought I'd do this one indoors today. So, as always, I want to have a theme to focus us as we finish this book. And the theme I've selected for today is going to be great beings. Where have I heard that before? Oh, yes, we're doing a project called the Great Beings Project. Yes, well, of course I did this deliberately. Right now, all of you, hopefully, are doing some thinking about, what is the rubric for great beings, and maybe applying some of those rubric categories to characters in Jerry Spinelli's Milkweed, and two characters, I should say, from that book, and one contemporary person, somebody who is alive during your lifetime. Could be somebody you know, it could be somebody who's famous, an athlete or a celebrity or something like that. But the whole idea is, as we think about this very abstract notion of great beings, we're all going to develop our own rubrics. The things that we feel are most important to a person attaining the status of great being. And as we finish Sarny today, I'm actually really sad. I've really been enjoying reading to you. I would enjoy more, obviously, in class where we can have a real interaction, as I take you through the literature. But this has been really unexpectedly wonderful as well. I hope you've enjoyed it. So I guess periodically as we go through the chapter, I want you to be thinking, is Sarny a great being? And if so, because I think she really is, and if so, why? What are the things about Sarny, about her life, and now as we get to the last chapter and we look to her future, what is it about her that makes her so great? All right, so let me get my spectacles on here so I can read to you. So these words actually look like words and not blurs. Oh yes, so much better. Chapter 17, here we go. Went just like she planned. Tyler and little Dealey, they had to help me with the wake and the funeral because Bartlett, he fell apart just like Miss Laura said. Just sat in the corner of the kitchen, crying softly, looking out of the small window. Nothing to see but the building next door, but he sat there a whole day and would have stayed longer except that I took a bottle of cordial and a glass and put him in his room and made him drink it, the whole bottle. So we know that Bartlett is grieving because Miss Laura has passed. And, Gary Paulson doesn't get too deep into Bartlett's story, but we do know that his connection to Miss Laura was incredibly profound. The fact that Sarny brings a bottle of cordial to Bartlett, I think that the symbolism there is inescapable for us. As we were discussing in the last chapter, Love, Life, and Loss, our happiness in life is a choice that we make or a choice that we don't make. And yes, Bartlett clearly is grieving, and he's grieving in a very deep, deep way. But I think that cordial is Gary Paulson's way, and Sarny's way as well, to remind Bartlett and the rest of us that this can only be a phase, that we need to use our freedom, the power of the freedom of our mind, as Miss Skolnick said in her video clip. The wisdom to choose happiness. And I think we know the sweetness of that cordial represents freedom, and I think that's the symbolism that's being connected right there in a very timely way for Bartlett. He slept then, but still wasn't good for much, and during the funeral parade out to the cemetery, we had to give him a ride in a carriage because he couldn't walk. Just kept crying and hanging on the hearse and falling down. He loved Miss Laura so much that he almost died himself. And when the funeral was over, he took to his bed and didn't get up for almost a week. And I think would have passed, except that I brought him soup and soft bread and made him eat. Miss Laura, she had her burial vault picked. Didn't surprise me, except that I thought she was so young, and it didn't seem that a young person would think on death. Of course, she wasn't that young after all. A week after the wake and funeral, Brune, you'll remember Brune was the lawyer, he came to call. Had a case full of papers and folders and set them all on a table. We were still in Miss Laura's. She didn't own it, but the rent was paid for a year, and I slept at home but kept it up for Bartlett. He was coming along better, but still couldn't think straight. Never saw grief that deep. Brune, he put on small spectacles and coughed to clear his throat, and looked on Bartlett and told him what Miss Laura she had done for him. Bartlett set off crying again, moaning, and I helped him to his room and came back out to the table. Little Dealey and Tyler were there, and Brune, he asked them to leave. They can stay, I said. They're my children. He nodded. I know, but Miss Laura wished for you to hear some of this alone. I'm sorry, those are her instructions. We'll go back to the house, Tyler said. We can come back later. Brune, he waited until they were gone, then cleared his throat again and pushed the spectacles up his nose. Red face, red nose, white and red, saw those things and couldn't help thinking on them, though they had nothing to do with what we were doing. Sarny, you are now a very wealthy woman. I nodded. I know. I've been saving for years. It adds up. I mean the estate. I'm not sure you understand, but Miss Laura left you everything. I nodded again. I know. She told me before she passed over. Couldn't say died. Couldn't think it. But there isn't much of an estate. She rented this place, and I don't know that she owns much else. She owns, you own. He took out some papers. 4 rental properties here in New Orleans, 5 rental properties in St. Louis, half interest in 2 riverboats, 1/4 interest in a bank here in New Orleans, a substantial number of shares in different businesses. She was very shrewd, and all the shares are in northern companies. I think she knew the South would lose the war and didn't wish to go down with them. And she owns quite a large amount of land situated here and there, some 7,000 acres. He took a breath. She also left money in gold in approximately the amount of $85,000. Add to this the fact that all the income properties and land bring in an added approximately $47,000 a year. And as I said, you are a very wealthy woman. Just sat trying to think. Couldn't. There's so much I couldn't even think on it. Couldn't take a guess. But he smiled. She said you would have trouble believing this. She instructed me to advise you until you wish me to stop. But don't worry. I've already been paid for whatever I do for you. I would have done it for nothing. I thought very much of Laura, and on several occasions asked her to marry me. I don't know how I'll handle her loss. all in the same tone, businesslike, straight out. But I could see his eyes were misting up and knew he meant it. But what do I do with it all? Was all I could think to say. I went to St. Louis. Not right away. I had to stay in New Orleans near a year just to figure things out. Brune, he worked with me, as he said, and I brought Tyler and little Dealey into it so they could help me, and they did fine. Little Dealey, she got to colting. She was 18, but she was more like me than Lucy and kept her head to business, even when the other parts wanted to take the bit and run. So I think, again, we come back to this notion of poetic justice. And the wealth that Sarny has now inherited from Miss Laura, I think is a clear example of poetic justice. Remember, Sarny started out, when we watched the movie Nightjohn, in basically a feed sack dress with a homemade doll and nothing else, no shoes, nothing. And now she has inherited more wealth than most people that time in the entire country had. It's quite a contrast, right? And it's quite a journey that she's taken. So, I think it's very true. A wise person once told me, money doesn't buy happiness necessarily. I think we proved that when we looked at some of those connected articles about people who'd won the lottery and how their lives really didn't turn out better for it. But what money does buy, and it buys people and it will buy Sarny, is choices. A lot more choices, right? So we're gonna have to see what choices Sarny makes now that her income really isn't something that she needs to think about for the rest of her life. Okay. So Dealey brought little Dealey brought a man named Isaac and wanted to marry him, but wouldn't without my say-so. I talked to Isaac for a spell, and he seemed better than most, had a good head on his shoulders, and was working at the market steady, so I gave a nod. They married, but little Dealey, she kept her head for business, and I was glad, because Tyler, he wanted to leave and go to school to be a doctor. He went off, and pretty soon little Dealey, she was running things as well as I could, and I went up to St. Louis to see the properties there. Took the steamship Henshaw up the river. Had to ride in the colored section again, but I rented a room. Tiny little thing and cost more than I wanted to spend, but I liked my privacy, and what with stopping and starting and finding firewood for the boilers, we were 3 weeks getting up to St. Louis, and I was glad to have a room. Passed my 40th birthday on the river. I wasn't sure of my birth date, but knew it close, so I made it June 9th, because I liked the first part of June. Soft summer nights, early summer birds and bugs singing. Had a cup of sassafras tea with my grits for a birthday party, and missed Tyler and little Dealey. Sassafras is like root beer flavor, right? Old-fashioned root beer. They had their own lives, and I thought on all that had gone, sitting there on the river, the paddle wheel churning, as the riverbanks slid past like they were greased. St. Louis, it was a sick place. Never saw so many bodies coming and going without a war. Some kind of influenza was there, and the whole city smelled of mud and vomit and death. Saw the things, and then found a boat and headed south and took it. Wasn't there a week and wished I hadn't come. The properties were taking care of themselves, and I couldn't stand the smell or the crowds. Everybody not dead was hurrying to get somewhere, too fast, and not in a friendly way like down south. Everybody edgy. Back in New Orleans, it was slower, and I stayed there a year just doing business, but felt bad even though Dealey, she had a new baby named Samuel. Couldn't figure why I felt bad, but little Dealey, she told me one morning. We had taken to having coffee of a morning, like I had done with Miss Laura. Little Sam, he sucked on a sugar sock, and we sipped our black coffee, and little Dealey said, "You need something to do." Sucked on a sugar sock. So for those of you who don't know, that's just a little pouch made out of, gauze, probably fabric, with sugar in it, and people would dip it in their tea or their coffee, and it would release the sugar. So why is Samuel having the sugar in that moment? What is Gary Paulson saying about his generation? That's right. Yes, yes, yes. You guys are right on top of this, of course. This is the sweetness of freedom, and this is something that Samuel would be able to pursue for the rest of his life, his freedom and what it means. Something that children who were born during Sarny's generation because of slavery didn't get to appreciate until much later in life, right? Good, kids, really good. Well, I've got plenty to do. Money coming in, money going out. It all takes something. Well, I can do all that. You need to work with people again. You need to teach. And she was right. I knew it when she said it. Dead right. Wanted to be teaching. And after that, I thought on it. There wasn't a need in New Orleans anymore. People learning, teaching each other. Those that wanted to learn could. Had to go somewhere else. And I couldn't see it until Tyler, he told me. He was home from school up north, and he had a friend going west. A lot of black people are going to Texas, he said. There's work out there and places to live. And that's how I came to be in Texas. So what a circuitous path that Sarny has taken, going from Georgia to New Orleans, and now she's finally going to end up in Texas. And we know when we started this novel, the beginning words, she's just right outside of Dallas, right? And that's where Sarny's life and her journey will come to an end. Left New Orleans and headed west by train and coach. Took 3 dresses and a box full of writing tablets and pencils and 2 more boxes full of books, and stopped at the first town in Texas where there were black people. Cruller, Texas. Mostly cowboys, and I had to laugh later when I saw my first movie about the West and all the white cowboys. Most of the cowboys I saw were black men. Boys, not men. Just boys. Headed out there to find those wild cattle and drive them north to railheads. Old joke said a cowboy was a man with a $10 horse and a $40 saddle. I saw them with no saddles and some with no horses, running on foot into thick mesquite to rope a longhorn and drag it down, wild as the cattle they caught. But they had to learn too. They had wives and young ones, and they all had to learn. Started a school in Cruller, and in a year or so, when some could teach others, I moved on to the next town, Beaufort. Same thing. Little Dealey, she sent me enough of my money to buy a small house for $300, and I turned it into a school. And when one could teach another, I moved on again. Did that my whole lifelong life. Did that until I was near 80 years old and had started maybe 20 schools. So many schools and so many faces looking up, I couldn't remember them. Did that until little Dealey, she was an old woman her own self with grandchildren. And I had great-grandchildren. And Tyler, he was an old man, and then he passed on. And I had to go back and bury him. Hard to do, bury your children. Hardest thing to do. They're meant to live longer than you, your children. Tyler, he had a good life. Too short, but good. He was a doctor for over 30 years and had a good practice, good wife, 3 good children. But it's hard to bury your young ones just the same. Little Dealey, she made the money double again several times until I doubt even she could count it. She kept sending me checks, but I didn't need but $40 a month and money for books and 5-cent tablets and penny pencils. Bit of chalk now and again. So most of the checks I just kept in a book and didn't cash them in. Then came a day, my body, it didn't care what my brain told it to do. It was too tired to do more, just too tired. So I found this home outside of Dallas, where the sun comes in the east window in the morning. Put myself in here. They don't let me drink coffee, but I think on it. Think on drinking coffee of a morning with Miss Laura, and write these words on a tablet, and wait. Wait to go visit with Dealey and Nightjohn and Miss Laura, and maybe see Martin again, and Stanley and Tyler, and those 4 soldiers shot in the belly. I worry on them sometimes before sleep. Just boys, never got to be men. Wait to go visit my friends. That's my whole life. Wow. Such a short sentence, but so powerful. That's my whole life. So, thinking about Sarny's entire life, what qualities of character do you think she possesses that makes her a great being? I think that's a question that really deserves a lot of thought, and maybe we can get started now. But I think a lot of you have been asking me, and some of your parents too, about extra credit that you can do before the end of the marking quarter. And if you want to write about the qualities of character that you see in Sarny that prove that she's a great being, I'd love to look at that for extra credit. We can start with some of the more obvious ones, okay? And let's start by looking at how the 2 books, Nightjohn and Sarny, come together. Sarny used her freedom to choose to end her life the last 30 years as Nightjohn lived. Nightjohn traveling from plantation to plantation and teaching, knowing the dangers and the risks. And for Sarny, that was how she chose to use her freedom as well. And she basically lived Nightjohn's legacy. Starting all these schools where people needed them the most out west. The westward expansion, population was moving out west. That's where all the work was. And the people there needed to learn. Why? Because we know that education is really the seed of our freedom. Okay? It comes from our ability to think on, in multifaceted ways, to understand our place in the universe and the world around us. So I would say that's a great place to start, how Sarny fulfilled Nightjohn's legacy. It's his garden, right? And she started her own gardens, because you can imagine the effect she would have on all of these students. And Gary Paulson doesn't mention it, but we can imagine that she would have had a tremendous effect on all of these people, and maybe they would teach as well, their own children, maybe others, and how the garden has just grown and grown and grown, generation upon generation. So an extraordinary story. I hope you enjoyed it. It really was a pleasure to read to you. So, I'll say goodbye right now, kids. Again, I want to remind you all to be safe, be healthy, be positive. Make sure we say I love you to the people in our lives that we care about the most. And I guess for the last time with this book anyway, I'll say no handshakes, but we can dab.